Some major news out of D.C. that bodes really poorly for Rudy Giuliani. A top bar disciplinary committee just recommended that Giuliani should lose his license to practice law for making false, frivolous, and harmful claims about the 2020 election. The committee released a 38-page decision, writing, he claimed massive election fraud but had no evidence of it. By prosecuting that destructive case, Mr. Giuliani, a sworn officer of the court, forfeited his right to practice law. And of course, Rudy plans to challenge the panel's findings in front of a larger bar discipline board, and ultimately, it'll be up to the D.C. Court of Appeals to decide whether or not he is disbarred for good in Washington, D.C. And before Trump's lackeys start calling this some witch hunt or claiming that the system is rigged, keep in mind that the committee was composed of 2 lawyers and 1 public member who heard testimony from Rudy and his associates for several weeks, reviewed all of the evidence, and decided to move forward with this recommendation. There was no indication that anyone even dissented in making this decision, meaning that whatever Rudy said during his testimony was apparently so dissuasive to warrant a unanimous ruling against him. And I gotta say, it certainly is strange that this guy wasn't able to make a compelling enough case.
Who was it called by? Oh my goodness, all the networks. Wow. All the networks.
Rudy Giuliani, where sanity goes to die. The D.C. case focused on Rudy's role in Pennsylvania, where he filed lawsuits to overturn the election results based on Trump's lies, and his attempt to have the court throw out hundreds of thousands of lawful votes in order to boost Trump's chances of stealing the state's election. The committee found that his claims were utterly false and reckless, and that he also violated professional rules of conduct. The committee went on to say that Rudy's misconduct was worse than other lawyers who filed frivolous cases in that he threatened the nation's democracy. Quote, the misconduct underlying his violations is immensely more acute. His frivolous claims impacted not only the court and parties involved, but threatened irreparable harm to the entire nation. The committee even invoked his past as America's mayor, saying, quote, the misconduct here sadly transcends all of his past accomplishments. It is unparalleled in its destructive purpose and effect. He sought to disrupt the presidential election and persists in his refusal to acknowledge the wrong he has done. And this is on top of the fact that Rudy is also facing suspension in New York. In 2021, a state court in New York suspended his right to practice law there. No final disbarment order has been entered against Giuliani yet, but just like in D.C., it's clear that that question is making its way through the process, and that we're likely, if not certain, to see a resolution sooner rather than later. And if I had to guess, it probably isn't going to end up well for Rudy Giuliani. And let's be clear, with all that's going on, it's become obvious that Giuliani may finally recognize the dire situation he's in, which may explain the recent news that Rudy may also be cooperating with Jack Smith as Smith works his way up the food chain. I asked former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner about that exact news in our YouTube-only legal series, The Legal Breakdown, and here's what he had to say.
Yeah, this is actually pretty big news because it wasn't just a voluntary interview. It was a special kind of interview. It was a proffer session. Now, what is a proffer session? Well, when people like Rudy Giuliani, who is, either the subject of a criminal investigation, which means he may have committed some crimes, and those crimes would fall within the scope of the grand jury investigation, or he may be the target of the investigation. That means somebody the prosecutors intend to indict. For example, we know Georgia District Attorney Fani Willis said Rudy is a target of her criminal probe in Georgia. When people like that, people who've done wrong, committed crimes, have criminal exposure, when prosecutors want to talk with them, want to interview them, they will invite them in for what's called a proffer session. As you can imagine, folks like that, are often not enthusiastic about coming in and talking to prosecutors because they have their own criminal exposure. And ordinarily, when we invite somebody in for a proffer session, it's because we want to know about what their criminal associates might have done. So, for example, what kind of information can Rudy provide about Donald Trump, about Sidney Powell, about Jenna Ellis, and others? So what we do is we invite them in for a proffer session. We give them a letter. We call it Queen for a Day Immunity. What does that mean? That means Rudy can come in, understanding he has potential criminal exposure, but he will have the protection of a one-day immunity letter, meaning whatever he says during that interview, during that proffer session, cannot be used against him. So the reporting is this was a proffer session. Rudy agreed to come in. He had that limited immunity. That gives the prosecutors, Jack Smith's team, the opportunity to ask Rudy all about what he knows about the crimes of others. And it also allows Rudy to speak openly about his own crimes. crimes. And, prosecutors will press somebody to talk about their own crimes. So what this means is that, Jack Smith is potentially, so far up the food chain that he is now attacking or dealing with one of Donald Trump's personal attorneys who was pretty much steeped in, all of Donald Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election.
So does this make it as close to certain as we can get that there may be some degree of cooperation with Rudy Giuliani?
The fact that Rudy showed up is not a guarantee that he'll cooperate, but boy, it is a big step on the road to cooperation, because once you begin laying out for prosecutors what you know, frankly, about your criminal associates, and kind of by extension or inferentially, you're also sort of admitting that you were part of this criminal scheme together with Trump and Powell and Ellis and others. That really takes him one huge step down the road toward cooperation. But as I say, that cooperation, in my opinion, will have to come with a guilty plea, perhaps to reduce charges, and an agreement to testify truthfully about the crimes of everyone else. And, then Rudy will be able to resolve all of his criminal exposure. And remember, Brian, when we know he's a target in Fani Willis's grand jury investigation down in Georgia, and I suspect what he is hoping is that if he can strike a deal with the federal prosecutors, he will urge them to come in and Bigfoot the Georgia prosecution, the state prosecution, and he'll try to leverage a federal guilty plea with cooperation to try to convince the state prosecutors not to go against him.
And remember, Rudy isn't just a target of Jack Smith's investigation, he's also a key player in Fani Willis's investigation in Fulton County, Georgia, where they're focusing on Trump's attempts to steal the election there. It's very possible that Rudy may have agreed or will eventually agree to cooperate with Jack Smith in the hopes that it can get Fani Willis off his back through some legal maneuver or agreement with Smith. In any case, what's clear is that Rudy undoubtedly feels the walls closing in, and so he'll either have to cooperate or face the full weight of the legal system. My guess, for what it's worth, is that Rudy probably doesn't want to die in prison. It's also worth noting that this new recommendation from the Barr Disciplinary Committee is part of a broader effort to hold accountable all of the lawyers who helped Trump's attempts to subvert the election. Other Trump lawyers, including John Eastman, Jeffrey Clark, Jenna Ellis, are also facing disciplinary action or sanctions of their own. Here's what Glenn Kirshner had to say when I asked him about the hierarchy that federal prosecutors are dealing with when it comes to holding Trump and his allies accountable. Glenn, you had mentioned going as far up the food chain as you can until the point where you stop and then you indict everybody above. Who do you think would be above Rudy Giuliani? Like, who do you think prosecutors are looking to indict, regardless of any efforts to cooperate? Who do you think that they want, irrespective of those people's willingness to come in and cooperate?
Yeah, great question. When you drop down one rung on the criminal ladder below Donald Trump, I think that rung is probably occupied by lots of people who are sort of comparably guilty or comparably big
Someone
fish.
like John Eastman, for example.
You took the words right out of my mouth. John Eastman, former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, all of Donald Trump's other lawyers, Powell and Jenna Ellis. Remember, Jenna Ellis and Rudy Giuliani went on that road show down to Georgia, and the reporting was that they misled Georgia state legislators about election fraud. And then somebody who I am keenly interested in seeing held accountable for his crimes, high DOJ official Jeffrey Clark. That's somebody who tried to corrupt and weaponize the Department of Justice, my former professional home, to do Donald Trump's dirty bidding and try to use the Department of Justice to overturn the election's results. So these are people who are all kind of one rung below where Donald Trump is at the top of that criminal ladder. And I have to believe Jack Smith is looking to hold them all accountable. Probably the next rung down would be the Bannons and the Flynns and the Stones and the Alex Jones and characters like that, like the whole Willard War Room cabal.
Yeah, it's more of the grifter crew. And so there you have it. Whether it's Barr disciplinary committees or federal prosecutors, they're slowly working their way up the food chain, and accountability is being sought for Trump's vast web of grifters, liars, and criminals who work on his behalf. And while it certainly didn't happen quickly, the fact that it's happening at all is consolation enough given the damage that the Rudy Giulianis of the world have wrought on our democracy. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to this channel and do your part to help grow the progressive media ecosystem. I don't do sponsorships or paid ads, I won't ask for money, but just subscribing to this channel goes a really long way and it helps get the message out to more people. The subscribe button is right here on this screen. You can also subscribe to my Spanish language channel, which I made to reach those crucial Spanish-speaking voters. That link is on the screen too. And finally, if you want to listen to my audio podcast, you can follow that link as well. Thanks so much for watching.